Bilingual Redditors. Have you ever heard someone talk about you secretly in another language that didn't think you understood? Story 1. I am Hispanic and fluent in both English and Spanish, and people often think I don't speak Spanish. So there was this one time I was at a laundromat folding clothes, while these two Hispanic ladies are at a table across from me, folding their clothes. Both of them are speaking loudly in Spanish, so I couldn't help but overhear what they were talking about. They start talking about alcohol. One of them said ever since she got married and had a kid, she stopped drinking. The other chick was saying that she loved getting drunk and could not live without alcohol, that she wanted a boyfriend so he could buy her alcohol and take care of her kid. Then they both start talking about their ideal boyfriend. One of them says that she is lucky to have found her husband because he is everything she wanted in a guy. The other chick was listing off a huge checklist of her perfect guy. Hot guy, must worship her, buy her everything, amazing job, clean, cook, take care of kids, etc. She then is interrupted by her friend saying that she was never going to find her perfect guy, with her list being so long. She then turns and looks towards me, saying, "What about a guy like him?" Her friend immediately rejected that idea. She then began to make fun of my clothes, hair, glasses, everything. I'm a pretty nerdy-looking dude. She says how I look like a loser who is doing nothing in life, probably that I'm poor and won't be able to buy her things, and more. I think to myself that this chick is quite rude and loudly reply in Spanish, "I wouldn't be into a chick like yourself because I wouldn't want a lazy drunk for a girlfriend." She got silent and just stared at me. Her friend began to laugh uncontrollably. Story 2. Living in Germany for a few years, I could understand German. Traveling in a Bahn somewhere near Augsburg, little girl around the age of 5 or 6 with her mother sat opposite and pointed at me as asked why I am so black. Mother patiently explains about Afro-Americans and slavery and freedom. Girl waves me while leaving. I am Indian. P.S. Thanks for the wedding gold. Kind stranger, incidentally. Tomorrow is my wedding day. Story 3. So much yes. I am a man with very long hair. One evening at Dell HQ, the Spanish-only speaking janitors were behind me waiting for the elevator, and one of them says, "She sure has a nice and beautiful hair." They turned red when I turned around to show them my long, elegant beard. I said, "Gracias," in a cute, girly voice. Edit. Aw, you guys. I'm not worthy of gold. I'm just the guy from R. Bacon. Pics. But not what you were hoping for. Old work pic for hair shot, shaved shot to be funny. Warson 1, 5 years ago. And a shot from the car, very recent, with beardly goodness. Story 4. I worked as an English teacher in a Japanese high school. I wanted my students to use only English in class, so I never let them know I understood and spoke Japanese. For a year, I overheard them talk about how long they thought my was, whether I had a Japanese girlfriend, and so on. At the end of the school year, with all the students gathered in the gym, the principal asked me to make a farewell speech, as I was returning to my home country. So I stepped up to the mic and delivered my speech in fluent Japanese. Ever see 800 jaws drop at the same time? It was glorious. Edit, English only. Only English. Story 5. I'm American. I was in Paris on the metro, and I heard these drunk American girls talking about me. I glanced at them and heard one say, "Do you think he's listening?" And her friend said, "No, we're speaking English. He probably only understands French. I don't even speak French." Story 6. I spent a few years in Seoul and gained near fluency after about a year of immersion. Most days on the street I'd hear something about the size of my nose or my blue eyes. Usually it was satisfying enough to look right at the speaker until they paused. Then I'd just introduce myself and ask them about their day. Met a lot of cool people. In some situations it was a game. One of my Korean friends was fluent in English. We used to take the bus together and talk about whatever, just to see what happened with the crowd. He spoke English and I replied in Korean. Really messed with the other passengers' heads. Good times. Story 7. I was at Disney World on a school trip, and there was a German father and son standing in front of us in line. They were looking around and muttering all kinds of insults. The usual, fat, stupid American bullshit. Now, having been an exchange student in Germany for a year, I perfectly understood everything they said. So I turned to my friend and started not so subtly insulting them, making sure they could hear me. The father turned around and said to me, "You may not understand us, but we understand you." I looked him right in the eye and said with a big smile on face, "Machen Sie bitte keinen Aufstand, ja? Let's not make a scene, okay?" Edit. Holy, my highest rated post ever. Anyway, since a lot of you are curious about his reaction, he just kind of turned around in bewilderment. Like the idea that an American could be bilingual, least of all in German, had never ever occurred to him once in his life. I heard them muttering a couple more insults. Scheisskerl, Arschloch, idiot. But they didn't really say anything to us after that. It seemed they kind of made it a point to pretend we didn't even exist. Story 8. My uncle was on the other side of this. My family is Dutch, and when my aunt and uncle were living in London, she taught him the phrase in Dutch for something along the lines of, "The fat woman is a," which they could employ easily without anyone knowing what they were talking about, at least until they went to Amsterdam and the tour guide at the Anne Frank House Museum got a bit surly, and he momentarily forgot which country he was in. TLDR, my uncle called a tour guide at the Anne Frank house a fat in her first language. Story 9. Once on the subway in New York, this young guy tells his friend in French, "Who would wear red pants?" I turn to him and say, "You'd better watch out. You're not the only one that speaks French." His friend then gets extremely embarrassed and says, "I told you so." Story 10. Every day at work. I work in a manufacturing facility with many Hispanic immigrants who like to gossip constantly. They assume that, due to the fact that I am white, I have no understanding of Spanish. But what they don't know is that I went to a school system which required us to take 4 years of a language, where I reluctantly learned Spanish. For 3 years now, I've been working there, listening to their gossip about me. I haven't said anything because I like being able to hear what they really think and find it kind of amusing. At times, it has been quite difficult to pretend like I can't understand, but I've managed to pull it off. I'm really looking forward to my last day when I bust out my Spanish and teach them a lesson about being judgmental and shallow. Story 11. I can speak Polish. By speaking Polish, you can, in varying degrees, understand Ukrainian, Czech, Slovakian, and to a small degree, Russian. I've heard a few things directed to me once or twice. On one particular occasion, 2 Ukrainian girls were talking about me on the subway, but not letting them know I understood. When I had to get off the train, I simply smiled at them and said, "I understood everything you two were talking about," and left. Their faces dropped. Story 12. Haha. Yes, last Saturday was a holiday for me, Aid. So I did the usual boring festivities, usually meaning going to people's houses. And one house there was this guy, typical DZ guy with a big mustache. He decided he'll make cracks about me to the other guys there in Urdu. They believed that because I always spoke in English that I couldn't speak Urdu. Called him out. He was embarrassed and apologized profusely. 1010 would do again. Story 13. Not me, but heard from my dad, a stamp collector and an associate curator at the Carnegie Museum. They sold off the collection long ago. A group of Polish falcons wanted to see the museum's Polish collection and started trash talking, Polish of course, about how badly their country's stamps were presented. The Carnegie Museum had at that time absorbed the entire Smithsonian stamp collection. The curator, Hungarian, spoke English, French, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, and a few other Eastern European languages. After a minute or two, he walked over to the group and kindly asked them to leave, in perfect formal Polish. The curator's parting shot was, "The last cultured Pole was Copernicus." Story 14. My mom speaks an obscure dialect of Chinese, although not very well since she learned English upon going to school. But she can still usually understand anyone else speaking the Cantonese dialect. One day we went to a market in Chinatown and my mom was trying to order something, but the people had a hard time understanding her because obscure dialect. At that point, the old ladies behind us started talking smack about us in Cantonese. My mom said what she got out of it was, "That lady is very Americanized. Her Chinese is terrible, and her daughter, me, is clearly half white, and because of that, she is ugly." We gave them the stink eye. Story 15. Live in South Korea and have pretty decent Korean skills. Found an English-speaking dentist advertised on an expat website because it's the kind of complicated situation where you would rather have treatment options explained in English. I didn't let on that I understood Korean though. They had just put in the gooey mixture mold to get an impression for making a crown, and I heard the dental assistant ask, "Is she Indian? But don't they have a caste system in India? How can they live like that?" The widespread opinion amongst Koreans is that Southeast Asians are beneath them, so I also picked up on the disgust in her voice. The dentist proceeded to inform her that I was from India, and it's a terrible way to live, and there are so many people living there. To which I respond by spitting out the mold and taking off with the dentist about how unprofessional it was to speak about clients while they are in the chair having treatment. He tried to apologize and make excuses and told me to understand his situation, common Korean response when they do something wrong. To which I replied, "Please understand my situation. I am a South African 4th-gen Indian descent, living in Korea for 5 years. And for 5 years, everywhere I go, people stare about me, insist that I must be Indian and can't possibly be African, and talk about me like I'm invisible." I told him that he should not advertise to the expat community because he doesn't deserve their business. At this point, pent-up anger at this kind of repeated incident came rushing through, and for a usually passive-aggressive personality, I got mean. I told the dentist that while his dentist assistant thinks she can judge me in my presence and thinks she knows who I am, I speak better Korean than his assistant can speak English and probably earn more than her. This is a low blow aimed at how Koreans value monetary status and feel that it gives social standing, and that would shock them since they thought I was someone from India they believe could not have these things. I then asked him why he hired people like her. This was followed by more groveling and I'm sorries and deep bows. Finished treatment, had no choice. and left by saying I would inform all the expats I knew about that incident. Story 16 German here. It's astonishing how many people think they're safe if they speak English. They must be aware that English is the universal business language, besides French, in a lot of countries, right? Besides that, I listen to a lot of relationship things which people probably should discuss in privacy. Story 17. Oh yes, all the time. My other language I speak is Hungarian, which is really obscure and not related to any other language beyond vague grammatical ties to Finnish and Estonian. And there are less than 15 million native speakers, of which just under 10 million live in Hungary proper. So, Hungarian speakers will often just assume it's a secret language, when outside Hungary that no one else will understand, because 99% of the time it's true. That said, there are enough Hungarians in some places like San Francisco that it's best to not assume this, and I overheard people quite a lot the summer I worked there. I remember, for example, hearing a couple arguing on a Saturday night in the grocery store, in the tone that normally you'd be having that argument at home, but they assumed no one else understood them. I've overheard hugely emotional goodbyes and confessions in train stations and airports that likewise should have been at home. You really just sort of cringe and turn the music up loudly on your MP3 player because telling them to stop would just be more awkward for everyone involved. My mom and dad had the best story like this, though, when they were in Austria for their first Christmas as a married couple. Apparently, at the table next to them at Christmas Eve dinner in a restaurant, there was a man by himself who had a German Shepherd, and he was letting the dog literally eat the food off his plate and all sorts of things like that. So my mom spent the entire dinner complaining about this guy letting his dog do all these things in a restaurant, etc. in Hungarian. But at the end of the meal, as he got up, the man came over to their table and said, "Kellemes karaksony unepeket kívánok," and left. In Hungarian, that's the polite way of wishing someone a happy Christmas holiday. Props to that guy, and props to my mom for telling this story to us as kids to not rely on our secret language too much in public. Story 18. Oh, I have a good one. I'm a gringa, but I speak fluent Spanish. At an after-hours nightclub in Miami, I took a break from dancing to go to the ladies' room. While I'm washing my hands, two Venezuelan girls come in. They look me over and the first says in Spanish, not so kindly, "Check out this white girl. She hasn't stopped dancing all morning." Her friend shrugs and says, "For a white girl, she can move." I turn around with a big grin and say to the first one in Spanish, "I can teach you my moves if you want." All three of us bust out laughing. They bought me a couple rounds and we danced together for a few hours. Fun times. Story 19. Yup, all the time. I don't really look Hispanic, so other people think I'm a different ethnicity and start talking about me in Spanish. It's usually older women about how my shirts are way too low cut and how my are out on display. The guys just usually comment on how big they are and call me chichona, a girl with big. Story 20. I'm a high school English teacher with mostly Hispanic students. And you'd never know it by looking at me, but I also speak Spanish. I never advertise this to my classes until something like this comes up. I've caught students talking trash about other teachers, about me, trying to cheat on tests and papers, all kinds of stuff. One time that stands out was when a student warned another one not to try cheating, and she responded with, "Es un garito, no sabe nada." He's a little white boy. He doesn't know anything. I looked at her and responded, "Sabes que este garito entiende todo lo que dices." You know, this white boy understands everything you say. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by some kid in the back going, "Oh shit!" And then the whole class erupted. Story 21. I was hiking at the Grand Canyon with my friend and my brother a few years back, and there was a small group of young Japanese girls, high school age, hiking behind us. On the way down, I hear them talking about how attractive my brother is and giggling. I find it funny, but I didn't say anything. They keep talking about him, and then later my friend, and chatting about who gets who, and still I say nothing. We get to a small overlook with a rock ledge sticking out that's sort of hard to access, and my daredevil brother manages to climb around the backside to get a better picture. One of the Japanese girls sees him and says she wants to go over there too, but she looks like she is going to jump to it, which seemed dangerous. So, I told her, in Japanese, that she should go to the other side to climb up. Those girls were absolutely stunned and looked beyond embarrassed. They knew I'd understood everything. I'll never forget it. Story 22. Mandarin speaker. It happens all the time. The weirdest time, though, I was in a clothing store in Tokyo, and a family came up and asked me a question in Japanese. I had no idea what they were saying, and then they started talking amongst themselves in Chinese about how I could possibly get by in Tokyo without understanding Japanese. Yeah, I hear ya. Story 23. I picked up a summer job at a local fast food joint this summer while on break from college. I'm a white guy from Southern California, and, while not fluently bilingual, I speak a fair bit of Spanish. During my first day, the rest of the workers, as I found out later, thought I was the owner's son and treated me like I was a king, which really confused me at the time. After they came to the realization I was just a normal guy at a part-time job, the chitter-chatter started, and some began to complain to each other that I shouldn't be there, getting territorial as if I were intruding because I wasn't like them. One woman in particular really didn't like me. About a week into the job, I overheard her saying something about me being an and getting in her way. Later on that day, she told me to help her with bringing something to the kitchen from the freezer downstairs because she was busy, to which I responded in Spanish, "But you called me and why should I help you do your job?" She was taken aback and kind of stammered off embarrassed and muttering under her breath. Felt good to confront her and watch her get all red in the face. After that happened, people didn't seem to mind me that much. Story 24. Somewhat related. I went to get some breakfast tacos, and while I was in line, one female employee asked another, "Te la limpiaste antes de venir?" I busted out laughing, and their jaws literally dropped. She was asking, jokingly, if the other girl had washed her before coming into work. Story 25. As a brown guy living in Japan, most people assumed I was a tourist and didn't speak Japanese. I used to overhear all kinds of weird, interesting conversations on the train. My favorite would have to be overhearing two Japanese schoolgirls about how hairy my legs are and wondering if it would be possible to make a carpet out of it. I didn't know if I should be flattered or offended. Gave them a wink as I walked out at my stop. Felt pretty. Story 26. I hear this a lot in Germany from English speakers. They talk amongst themselves assuming English is their secret language, then turn around to ask people something in English, assuming to be understood. What's the thought process there? The best were two German girls, though. I was with a Scottish friend, sitting down opposite of them in the subway. They immediately switched their conversation, sexual topics, to atrocious English. It got cringeworthy really fast, so we missed the chance to let them know that we understood. To avoid embarrassing them, we kept quiet till they got off the subway, just raising the occasional eyebrow. Story 27. This is me. A lot. I have a thing for languages, so I've learned Italian, French, Greek, and working on Turkish, plus my native English and Spanish. I live in DC, and we get tourists from all over the world. But the ones that talk the most are other Hispanics that don't think I can speak Spanish, because I'm American, and speak almost exclusively in English with my brothers. A lot call me creído for purposely keeping my distance, but I just like to give people their privacy and don't naturally speak to strangers. Once this Italian chick mentioned to her friend on the metro about a cute guy in a blue jacket. Took me a few seconds to look around before I realized they were talking about me. But when I did, I blushed like crazy. They freaked out, because they knew I knew. In Paris, my brother and I walked into a souvenir shop, and the guy at the cashier started talking about my brother, who was admittedly being a typical American loudmouth. He said something about refusing to speak English for the brutes. I sternly told my brother we were leaving that in French, which my brother only understood from my change in demeanor and dagger stare at the cashier. I worked really hard on my Italian to make sure I don't have much of an accent. Well, a Roman one at least. The nicest people are Italians when they find out I have exactly 0% Italian ancestry. My family has gone to this one Greek restaurant for years. When I came back from college with a decent grasp of basic Greek, I could follow along with what the waitresses were saying, but nothing bad, mostly talking about their kids. Not much experience with Turkish people outside of study friends, since I only started learning it after I visited the country. Oh, and once in Colombia, a white American couple were talking about their dinner from the night before. I asked them where they ate, and they were noticeably shocked. Story 28. My husband and I, he speaks French, and I speak Spanish, we both speak English, were vacationing in France, and while visiting this castle town some years back, stopped for lunch. The waiter thought we were Americans and decided to call me A in French when we complained we had been waiting for 5 hours for our food to come out and said we were going to leave and to please give us the check for what we had consumed. I think the waiter was fired that same day when my husband gave the restaurant manager a piece of his mind. In French. Story 29. OMG. Yes, I have so many. I'm half white, half Filipino, but I look like a skinhead with a slight tan. Nobody would ever believe I spoke Tagalog, so I get a lot of these. Here are a few of my favorites. I'm a bit heavy set, and I was at a friend's wedding which was predominantly Filipino. Anyways, I was in line at the dessert buffet, and two of the people I was sitting with asked me to get them food as well. So I had 3 plates in my hand as I was waiting to get served, and 2 Filipino ladies behind me said, in Tagalog, "Look at this fat guy. He's going to eat everything before we get there." I chuckled and shook my head. I didn't bother confronting them since I have a bunch of aunties that would probably do the same thing. I was helping a Filipino coworker pick up some furniture she bought from a patio furniture place. Since I owned a truck, she asked if I could help her. During this time, everyone had Nextels, and you could do that direct connect thing that made the phones act like walkie-talkies. So she direct connects her husband, telling her we're on our way. He replies back in Tagalog, "Don't let your coworker in the house. He might steal something." Now this being on the speakerphone, I heard the whole thing and she knew I spoke Tagalog and understood. Her face turned bright red and started yelling at her husband, "You stupid idiot. He speaks Tagalog." When we get to the house, he acts like nothing happened, even invites me in for a beer. I politely said no thanks and helped my coworker unload the truck. She kept apologizing. She was so embarrassed. I was at Disneyland one time, and we were on Main Street standing in the crowd waiting for the parade to go by. There is a section roped off in the for handicapped people. I noticed there was a Filipino family in front of us, with a middle-aged man in a wheelchair taking up the front row. As the parade started, the man in the wheelchair got up and walked forward to get a better view. One of the older women started yelling at him in Tagalog and told him to sit back down, or he would blow their cover. Apparently they got the wheelchair so they could cut in line and get special treatment. Edit. Grammar and spelling. Story 36-2. Pale white skin, blue-eyed American here. I'm a dude, despite the username. I speak Spanish nearly fluently, lived abroad, majored in Spanish, have taught it in the past. There used to be this bar downtown I would go to that, on a certain night of the week, would kind of get overtaken by gay men. I'm not gay, but I don't give a you. I just wanted a good drink, and kind of realized that as the night went on, more and more gay men were showing up. No big deal. So, I go to the restroom of the bar, and there's one other guy in there. He sees me, and I'm sure at that point figures I don't speak Spanish. He gets on his phone and basically starts telling his friend how many good-looking men there are, and how if he comes out with him, he'll certainly get a piece of etc. I chuckle to myself and figure I won't say anything. He keeps going. But then I notice that he's given the wrong name of the bar and poor directions. So I turn to him as I'm washing my hands and tell him in perfect Spanish the name Directions. Blank stare. Gracias. Story 31. The other side is true. As a teenager, I was conversationally adept in French, and I knew all the bad words. So when some asshat would cut me off while I was riding my bike, motobacane, naturellement, they would get a torrent of French cuss words. While made me feel great, until a rather large hillbilly stopped his pickup and yelled back at me, in fluent French. I rode far and fast to get away. Story 32. Yeah, this happens a bit, and it works both ways, at home and abroad. I'll give you two examples. 1. I was sitting at a Spanish coffee shop with my SO's mentally disabled brother. Physically, you can't tell he has any issues, but in reality, he's a grown man with the mind of S-child. He has a habit of being clumsy, so after knocking over the table, these two bitches started making nasty comments between themselves about him. Unaware I am a native English speaker. 2. I went into S shop looking for crisps. I was delighted to find cheese and onion flavor, as normally in Spain you get jamin, or just olive oil flavor. Anyway, when I went to pay, I spoke in Spanish with the cashier. He looked at me in surprise and said he only keeps weird flavors like that in stock for foreigners. Story 33. Mexican here. I was on a bus stop once and there were a couple of white Mormons next to me. For what I heard, the tallest one was starting out and was nervous about talking to strangers about religion. The other guy wanted to give him confidence and told him, "Look, he seems dumb. Why don't you practice with him?" Or something like that. Then, Elder Tall approached me and asked me if I wanted to hear about Nuestro Señor y Salvador Jesucristo. I immediately answered, in English, "I am sorry, but I believe you might want to execute your learning with a more short-minded individual." Elder Short went pale as a sheet, and when the bus arrived, the only 3 seats were together. That was an awkward trip. For them, I mean. Story 34. I speak more than 3 languages. So often after even my close friends know a few of the languages I speak, they grow complacent around me. Little do they know, I speak English, Hindi, Marathi, Tamil, Punjabi, Spanish, Russian, and Bengali. One time, I was sitting with my Kazakh friend and my German-Russian friend. We were eating parathas at my house and chilling and playing Call of Duty. Bastards started detailing their plans to steal my ice cream from the fridge and divide it up, in Russian. So I sneaked ice cream into the conversation and told them there was no ice cream left. Then I walked out 10 minutes later with a full bowl and told them I spoke Russian as well. Their faces. Story 35. Nope, but once I was talking over the phone with the managing director of my company, and they didn't know that I could understand some German, and he started talking about some secret event that was going to take place. In German. I just typed in Google Translate as they spoke and found out about the whole story. Story 36. Sort of. I worked for the world HQ of a company, and we were imposing a project on the affiliate in the Netherlands. There were a bunch of English-speaking, mostly US, UK, and Canada, HQ people working with an equal number of Dutch people who really didn't want us there. It's easy to pick up basic words, especially names, when you keep hearing them. Someone peeked into the room I was in and asked, in Dutch, where to find someone. I didn't even notice it was Dutch, I just answered in English and he left. The 2 Dutch women in the room looked at me horrified, and one stammered and asked how much Dutch I'd picked up. Without missing a beat, the other English speaker in the room replied in a warning tone, "Much more than you realize." Of course, we never had any idea what they were saying when they were talking about us, but those ladies were really nice to us for the next week, and a lot of people quit speaking Dutch around us after that. Story 37. This didn't happen to me but a boss of mine. I was stationed in Okinawa, and I was working in our dormitory with our dorm manager. We were having problems with the AC, and we called the local contractors, and they were two Japanese men. My boss started telling them what needed to be fixed, and then they started speaking Japanese, and then all of a sudden my dorm manager stands up and starts screaming at them in Japanese, and then the Japanese guys start bowing and saying, "Sorry, so sorry." And my boss yells, "Get the F out." I'm freaking out, and I ask my dorm manager what did they say, and he said, "They said what did I know, and I have no idea what I was talking about, and who was I to tell them what they needed to be doing?" Little did these little Japanese guys know that my boss had been stationed in Japan for 10 years, married to a Japanese woman, and spoke fluent Japanese. The funniest part was the boss of the Seku, Japanese guys, was my dorm manager's brother-in-law, and he had them fired. Ah, good times. Story 38. I'm bilingual. English and French. I was in the hospital recovering from surgery, high as on morphine, when shift change occurred. The two nurses were talking in French, one briefing the other on the 4 patients in the room, who had all been speaking English with their visitors. The briefing included color commentary about our personalities, some of it being relevant to our medical status, e.g., woman in bed. 2 hasn't gone to the bathroom yet on her own, used a commode because she's being a big baby. Man in bed. 3 has problems hitting the bowl, and that it might be better to have a catheter put back in than to have housekeeping come back every hour. And that he's in for thinking it's funny. When they got to me, nurse 1 said that I was high as and hilarious, and that nurse 2 would enjoy any conversations I had with my dad if he came back. I sat up, said, "Thank you, my dad thinks I'm funny too," in French, and laid back down. They both stood awkwardly and then said, "You'll be discreet?" I nodded and said, "For more pudding." More pudding arrived. Story 39. All the time. I speak Spanish fluently, but look white, so people think I don't speak Spanish. I was walking with my ex-girlfriend at the boardwalk when a group of Central American guys decided to start talking about screwing her and talking about me when I turned around and told them to off in Spanish. I've never seen people become the awkward seal meme so quickly. Story 40. Yes, I speak almost perfect Spanish, and a coworker, actually my supervisor, used to talk about me from time to time, usually insults. He told someone that he looked at my paycheck and told everyone how much I make, which was more than most, thinking I didn't understand him. He would then smile and be nice to my face. He also used to talk about how he was having relations with his 13-year-old niece, and how he had pictures and toys. I kept my mouth shut while secretly hating him for a while. Recently, he was arrested after someone reported to police what he was doing, and now he is in jail without bond. I contacted the district attorney and have offered assistance against him, also told him about the pics and toys, and they have since obtained a warrant and searched his house and car. I can't wait until to see the look on that's face when he sees me in court testifying against him, speaking perfect Spanish. Story 41. Oh, I hope I'm not late to the party. I am a Hebrew-English speaker, and I was in Israel out at a bar with some friends, and we decided to mess around with some people. Guys would come over to us, and we would pretend we could only speak English, and they would tell us the most ridiculous things like, "Oh, we are soldiers, we have fought in the fields." And they would whisper to their friends in Hebrew that they were just office secretaries or whatever, and it all finally came to a halt when some guy said to his friend in Hebrew, "Dude, if you're not fucking her tonight, then I will." So I responded in Hebrew, "Excuse me?" And they all just about fell over with embarrassment. Story 42. Not bilingual, but I know Russian, and it's not a common thing at all here in Malta. A few years ago, I was working in retail, and I had a Russian mother and daughter duo at my till. While I was scanning their stuff, the mother turned to the daughter and told her something along the lines of, "Look at this girl. She is so fat." When they paid, I gave them a huge smile and told them, "Spasiba, thank you." They looked absolutely stunned. It was brilliant. Story 43. Oh, absolutely. I moved to Iceland from America, and I picked up on the basics of the language pretty quick. I think I was 14 or 15 at the time, and I was really chubby and out of shape, and I was resting after the big dance part we just did while we were rehearsing a play for school, and there was a guy standing behind me, who is a great friend of mine now, who straight up said, "This fat pig never does anything." I understood what he said, but I was just amazed that he could just say that behind me, literally behind me, and think that it was okay. Story 44. Jep, I'm German, but my father is Dutch, so I can speak that as well. Had some interesting encounters where some Dutch tried to insult me. The best worst was when I was shopping, and 2 girls behind me talked about me, where one was stating that she fancies me and that she would like to do things with me. I turned around with a nice smile, just to discover that these girls were about 14, 15. I was about 29. Didn't told them that I could understand them. Story 45. Cafe in Versailles. I was with my mum, and she accidentally knocked a woman's bag off the back of her chair. She turned and said sorry, and the rude lady called my mum a stupid English bitch in French. I went mental at her in French, and her face afterwards was a picture. Mum asked me what I said, but I daren't say it back to her.